Inaugural event for the Rowan Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies. I'm Stephen Hain, coordinator of the Center at the Rowan's College of Humanities and Social Sciences. It's absolutely fantastic to see such an outpouring of support for this new endeavor here at Rowan. We have a very dynamic program for you this evening. To begin, I'd like to invite to the podium Dr. James Newell. Dr. Newell is the provost of Rowan University, our chief academic officer, and will formally open the center and our proceedings tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Newell.
Well, I'd like to thank you all for coming out to such an important event. And I can't begin to tell you how honored I am that Rowan was asked by the State Commission on Holocaust and Genocide Education to serve as a hub for this kind of activity in southern New Jersey. But at the same time that that's true, I am equally appalled that it is necessary to have such a center anywhere. It's a statement about man's humanity towards man, and it's disturbing to live in a world where that is absolutely necessary. We all know the horrible statistics of the Holocaust, that there were more than 11 million total victims of the Nazi regime, including 6 million Jews. That means that 75% of the Jewish population of Europe in 1939 was wiped out during the Holocaust. But I think there's a tendency in society today to think of that event as an aberration in history, this odd moment when evil rose and we saw its face and at a great price somehow learned this lesson that would never happen again. But the facts don't bear that out at all. This was certainly not the first case of genocide. Even within the same century, we had over 1 million Armenians and 1.5 million Greeks killed during the Ottoman Empire in World War I. Since then, we've had event after event after event. 3 million Cambodians during the Pol Pot regime in the 70s. We had more than 1 million Rwandans executed in a 100-day period. That's almost 10,000 people a day. More recently, we've had the events in Serbia, in the wake of and Kosovo, in the wake of the ethnic cleansing cases there, where Muslims were exterminated. We had 400,000 people in Darfur experience ethnic cleansing. And so what we see is this is not a single case of an aberrant regime that came to power and somehow did this. But it's a pattern of behavior that is repeated over and over again in the history of the world. And that's why it's so important that a center like this exists, that there's an opportunity to try to understand, to try to learn the conditions that allow such horrific acts to be perpetuated and to be accepted in silence by the larger world community, and to try to use that information to prevent this type of event from ever happening again. Now, I'm an engineer, and so I'm very comfortable in the world of statistics and numbers. But the problem with relying too heavily on them in situations like this is it's easy to lose track of the fact that every one of those numbers is a person. It's a three-dimensional human being impacted families, generations, and all of these other pieces of this. And that's why tonight's event is so special, that we also have two survivors who can talk with an experience that I will never be able to share of the personal impact of these kinds of events. I think this is an incredible opportunity. I think we are all blessed to have the opportunity to hear and learn tonight. And I think this is the beginning of an incredible center, an incredible program at Rowan University. and I'm honored to be a part of it. Thank you all for coming out today. And welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Newell. Our next speaker needs little introduction for many of you. Dr. Paul Winkler has been one of the pivotal figures in Holocaust and genocide education since 1974. His educational activities over 50 years have included teacher, principal, superintendent, regional education director, and New Jersey Deputy Assistant Commissioner of Education. Dr. Winkler's efforts have seen the establishment of the Commission on Holocaust and Genocide Education in New Jersey and the Holocaust Genocide Mandate, which was signed into law in 1994. He's led a number of collaborative efforts, including the Italian, Arab, and Amistad Commissions, created numerous curriculum guides regarding genocide, written a host of articles, and his most recent book, Teaching the Unspeakable, tells of the history of Holocaust and genocide education in New Jersey. In recognition of his work, he's been the recipient of the Philip Foreman Human Relations Award from the American Jewish Committee of Central New Jersey, the NJEA Humanitarian Award, Martin Luther King Academy of Leaders Award, the Outstanding Educator Award from ASC. The list goes on. It is an extraordinary level of achievement. Most recently, Dr. Winkler has been a driving force in encouraging Rowan University to found the center that we inaugurate this evening. It's therefore a great pleasure to ask you to welcome the Executive Director of the New Jersey State Commission on Holocaust and Genocide Education, Dr. Paul Winkler.
Ladies and gentlemen, I must tell you that there have been many things in my career, many activities, but I am so excited tonight to have the opening here at Rowan University of the Holocaust Genocide Resource Center. I'm looking over at Mrs. Chamberlain, Dr. Chamberlain. Her husband and I talked about this idea over 10, 12 years ago. Just didn't grab hold. But Executive Vice President Stephen Weinstein, we found his name and a letter was sent to him. And within weeks, I was asked to come to a meeting with the President. So, Mr. Newell, your remarks were right in the heart, but please share with the President our feeling for today. Within 1 minute of my making a comment and his responding to what he saw as the potential for a community of people living, working, being together. We put the two ideas together, and within weeks, a committee was set up. There are people in the room. I don't want to forget their names, so I'll leave it to them to just remember how much I appreciate it. Meetings were set up. Ideas were generated. Because you heard that in 32 years ago, whatever that is, Tom King, governor then, went on a trip to Israel and saw some of the camps in Europe. When he came back, he said we must have a commission of Holocaust genocide education. And then 20 years later, a law was passed. So many of you who were in high school a few years ago should have received education about Holocaust and genocide education. It doesn't say in the bill that we're going to stop the next genocide. It doesn't say in the bill that the next genocidal dictator will be eliminated. It talks about teaching about what happened, but it also says something else, that every student and every teacher, because of these wonderful survivors that you will hear from, go out into the schools. They teach about goodness. Don't be a bully. Be a good person. Treat others like you would want to be treated. So I know that around this state and even in the country, there are thousands of boys and girls that will not join ISIS and other organizations like that, but will stand up for people when they say evil being done. When I asked the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, or told them about this exciting day that we were going to have to open the center, and this, of course, is just the beginning. There will be workshops for students, workshops for teachers in the field, teaching about the Holocaust and genocide mandate. There will be people who will be helping, materials that will be available. When I spoke to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, they asked, well, why would you want someone from us? And the answer for me was very clear. For someone to come from Washington to inaugurate this center is very, very exciting. And I'll only end with telling you again that for me in my heart, this is one of the most exciting pieces of education in 50 years. And I did teach here at Rowan. I did work here at Glassboro then, and Rowan now. My wife has 2 diplomas. So Stephen, when we found that you were going to help us with your team, we couldn't have been more excited. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Wickler, for those very generous words and inspirational thoughts. Our speaker this evening, Tim Kaiser, is Deputy Director at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. Tim joined the staff in 2000, and since then has worked in both the education and exhibition divisions. As the Deputy Director, he's responsible for the entire public education program at the museum, which includes exhibitions, digital and website creation and engagement strategies, resources for teachers and students, and programs and outreach for professional leadership audiences. Those of you who have been there will have seen the outstanding work led by Tim. Tim Kaiser holds an MA in Modern European History from Wayne State University, second MA in Modern German History from the University of Michigan, and is completing his PhD in Modern German History, also at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. His undergraduate degrees are in History, English, and Secondary Education, and he taught high school social studies for several years. Tim has been at the forefront of teaching people about the legacy of the Holocaust, and will talk to us this evening about now more than ever, the need for accurate, authentic, and authoritative Holocaust education. Please give a warm welcome to Tim Kaiser.
Thank you very much. It is an honor to be here. It really is. Thank you kindly for inviting me, and it is something that I've looked forward to for a while. I also want to thank our Holocaust survivors for your work and what you do, because we stand behind you, and we are thrilled in all of what you do as educators and helping us as we work with you. So thank you as well. 70 years ago this week, the International Military Tribunals at Nuremberg began. While rightly so, we're going to be thinking a lot about international justice on the 70th anniversary and thinking about how we as a society combats crime against humanity. Another aspect of the Nuremberg trials was the collection of evidence, something we don't always think about. But evidence was collected and put into the court record. And in many ways, it's some of the first Holocaust resources that were used to tell a story, that were used for a purpose to convict. Of course, collecting resources, collecting memories started long before the military tribunal in Nuremberg, but it's an interesting bridge to the present. As we think about what we do, we continue in that tradition of finding the authoritative evidence to find those materials that we can shape, that we can create, that also serve a purpose for us as Holocaust educators. So I'd like to think that we stand in that tradition as well. I don't think I need to speak long to this particular group of people about how New Jersey has led in this field and has ensured that Holocaust education is a part of the curriculum. And I see Rowan University, the new Holocaust and Genocide Center, as being an added tool in that effort. And so it's something that speaks volumes to the commitment. It speaks volumes to the dedication of the people in this room. And I applaud and congratulate you on for what you're doing. Because as a Holocaust educator, I need people like you. We all need to work together in that way. Now, though, for the bad news. All right? You didn't bring me from Washington, D.C. to say good things. So I want to say a few things about the state of Holocaust education. I recently had the opportunity to be involved with and to read and one person to be involved with two evaluations that one that the museum created and one that took place in the United Kingdom on Holocaust education, where in the United Kingdom, 8,000 students between 14 and 18 years old were surveyed and asked about their understanding of Holocaust knowledge, Holocaust understanding, and perception. And then in Washington, we recently completed a survey of 1,500 middle and high school students who came as part of field trips as a class to the museum to visit one of our special exhibitions, which we call Some More Neighbors. In both of those situations, although two different school systems, two different countries, it's remarkable how similar the results are. The big overlying picture, the big takeaway, is the majority of students would fail when it comes to core Holocaust knowledge. It's just, they don't have it. It also became very clear that students had a very simplistic understanding of
Holocaust and what happened and how it affects their lives. And so this became, for many of us, as we started reading and getting into the research, it became, I would say I didn't pull my hair out, but it's something that didn't bode well. But as we started to look at it, a few trends emerged. So for example, students in the UK, the majority of students thought that the Holocaust happened in Germany. A large percentage of them thought that the mass killing began January 30th, 1933, the day Hitler came to power. When it came to identifying camps, Auschwitz was identifiable, but we're down to about 15% of students would be able to identify Treblinka, Bergen-Belsen, things along that line. And then about 46, 47% of students had no idea how the Holocaust ended. That the war played a part, the liberation, the Russians, that was not something they were able to identify. And so as we looked at that information, and as the evaluators looked at the information, they tried to come up with what's the cause. All right, so the students are not getting this information. They're coming to the museum, we're interviewing them, we take them through Holocaust courses. What's happening here? So they found a strong correlation, and this shouldn't be a surprise, but there was a strong correlation between the length of exposure to the history and the sources from which students sort of learned about the history. So what we found at the museum, of the middle and high school students, 25% of the students who came to the museum a year ago had 3 or more touches with the Holocaust. So that included their class, could have included reading the Diary of Anne Frank, maybe seeing Boy in the Striped Pajamas. So they had 3 or more, 25%. That means 75% had 2 or less. 47% of high school students had 3 or more touches, exposures to the Holocaust. Now, we can correlate that. We see that the more people knew, what we call the higher the historical literacy, the more exposure, the more sources that they're exposed to. Now, that's obvious, and especially for teachers, you say, I can tell you that bodes well for us as educators. That means the more we can get students into the classroom, the more we can talk with them, the better. However, the problem, and this is what surprised a lot of the evaluators, again, in both evaluations, is that it also caused students to have very simplistic narratives and very long-lasting narratives of what the Holocaust was. Because the Holocaust is popular, and because they didn't have that amount, or a good amount of accurate, authoritative information, they were forming very simplistic narratives about the history. And so in Washington, the common narrative was Hitler, Nazis, World War II, death, concentration camps. And that was their narrative. And their takeaway message was sadness and despair. So this idea had a bit of knowledge, but it really revolved around this simplistic narrative. Now, what was surprising and actually very disappointing to myself working at the museum is that even after going through an exhibit, that narrative was so powerful we could not change it, or we could change it very little. So we can't do it alone. We're going to need the help of everyone in order to do this. So 83% of students, before they went into our exhibit, said that Hitler was the person, the one responsible for the Holocaust to happen. As they came out of the exhibit, it was 75%. So that's some change, but not a lot. And then 6 months later, it was actually 84%. So it had went up after. So again, hand-wringing, what are we doing? Is this the way we're supposed to be working with students? So I raise this because I think it's an important lesson to remember that if we want students to get the lessons of the Holocaust, or to see this as more than a history lesson, we're doing a major battle against students' perceptions, students' lack of knowledge about the Holocaust, and that these perceptions are pretty ingrained. And no matter what we do, it's going to take time. So this idea that multiple sources over long periods of exposure is something that we as a community, that we as educators need to think about more holistically. It's not about, oh, they're in my class, I will get them then. No, it's about what are they taking in 6th grade, 8th grade, 10th grade, 12th grade? What about after school? What about visits to historic sites? How does that all encompass? And so you see that there's this milieu in which our students today are operating that is filled with inaccurate, simplistic, also very disappointing results when they are asked to talk about the Holocaust. So what it's doing is it's getting in the way for where we want to take students. If we say this is about Holocaust and genocide and preventing it tomorrow, and having students take responsibilities for their own actions, and thinking about community, well, they're thinking about death, Nazis, concentration camps, and they are not seeing it as something that belongs to them. We had students in our evaluation say, I don't see Nazis on the street. I don't have to deal with death. What does this have to do with me? This is there, I'm here. So as a Holocaust educator, I find that to be a problem, and I hope you do as well. So I want to propose 2 areas that I think serve as a place to challenge us, and I would think that the Rowan Holocaust and Genocide Center, the Resource Center, will also find this to be a challenge. So one of the things I was thinking about in preparation for tonight was, where can we make a difference? And of course, it's the development of resources, right? So multiple sources. We also have the web, and we have students who come to the website. So we recently did a evaluation. Again, this was an online survey. We do a lot of those right now in Washington, which is good. We get to know about our audiences. We did an online survey, and we found, and these were people coming to our Holocaust Encyclopedia, which is our flagship sort of knowledge-based resource for learning about the Holocaust. And we had about 60% of the people who came were students. When asked why they were there, number one, it was like 95% said, my teacher told me to go here. All right? So we thank teachers for that, because we need that. But we need authoritative, we need teachers to do that. A week or so ago, I put the word Holocaust into my Google search. I brought it up. You know, after about 5 or 6, I'm still on my first page of results, and I'm starting to question some of the sites. I don't know them. Now, they could be totally fine, accurate sites. They didn't seem to be a problem, but you know, I didn't know. By the time I got to the second page, we're getting into some Holocaust denial. You know, no gas chambers in Auschwitz, the whole story. And that's on the second page. Now, if I'm not sure always where to go, and this is my profession, you know, making sure that teachers can direct their students to the right sources, or that we have the authoritative, the places to go. Because now anyone can put up, quote, resources on the web. Anyone can put up a YouTube movie that students could watch. But yet, where are those trusted sites? So I see Rowan as being a place where we can begin to help our teachers, to begin to create those resources, direct them to the places where they need to be. The other thing, though, I was thinking about, you know, that's a very traditional model. Teacher assigns something, the students have to go find the answer on the website. But what would have happened if 60%, those 60% of students who visited the Holocaust Encyclopedia, what if they had came back when their teacher didn't tell them to have an assignment? What if they said, we just want to come back. We like the material. And so for us at the museum, this is our challenge for the next decade. We're in the midst of rethinking our Holocaust Encyclopedia, making it a place that mirrors the social media, the social context in which students think, operate on their phones, on their tablets today. It doesn't mean watering down the history. It doesn't mean changing the content. It means meeting our students where they are. Because if I need to get multiple sources, longer exposure, which is our key that we learned in our evaluation, then why not use the web? Why not use the multimedia, the social media? I don't think we have an answer, and I'm hoping people in the audience have answers and are experimenting and trying it. But if we don't, we are going to limit it to the formal education and to the teachers, which is great, but I like to also think of the informal realm as well. Two of the things, or another thing I just wanted to mention, just as an experiment that we're trying in Washington. Again, having students own the history, having students want to engage. We just launched this week a beta version of something we're calling Citizen History. We take it after our citizen science. Some of you are familiar with citizen science, where average people around the country can enter certain types of data, take certain type pictures of birds or whatever it is, upload it to certain sites, and so there's this a larger amounts of data that can be analyzed. So we're getting ready for an initiative on Americans and the Holocaust, and a lot of Americans, we've just did some more evaluation surveys, found that a lot of Americans like to think we didn't know what was happening in Europe. That's not true. The more you get into it and see, people had opportunities to know. We also know that there's been a lot of research about what the New York Times reported, what page it was on, and so forth, and some of the larger newspapers. So our Citizen History project is about getting students across the country to go to their local newspapers, either digitally, microfilm, and we have a program where they find out what was happening in their community. We give them particular dates. Some of them have to deal with American history, some of them deal with Holocaust history, but we want them then to report on what was reported in their newspaper a day or two before, on that day, and a day or two after. Were there letters to the editor, for example, after Kristallnacht? What was being reported in your community? So students then, we actually take a picture with their phone of the microform reader of the page, and they upload it to our website, and we are creating a database. Eventually, what I'd like to do for this exhibit is, as you come into it, you say, what was happening in my town? You have a big interactive map, you touch your city, and everything comes up. And so right there in front of you, you recognize that, hey, you know what? If we read the paper, we might have known what was happening overseas in these places. So that's one thing, implication. A second implication, I think, of this simplistic knowledge, this lack of historical literacy, is that we also need to move and get students to think about this history as their own. They need to see themselves in this history. So historical literacy should not be the end product, but it should be the impact. It is the impact that allows them to have enough knowledge that they can see themselves in the historical lesson. So let me give you an example of what I mean by this. Students come to the museum and they, right away, they have this simplistic narrative, Nazis, death, World War II. They don't see themselves. This has nothing to do with them. So a lot of times the lesson is, this is what happened, learn how it happened. What if we change it a bit? What if we asked, why did it happen? How did it happen? And so one of the things we experimented with was we took the time period in the Weimar Republic. Nazis came to power, 1933. Instead of just reporting out what happened, how they rose, we asked the question, how was it possible, or how did the Nazis use the democratic system to come to power? Did they campaign? Did they have symbols? Did they use propaganda? And so, of course, you know the answer, but what we did is, instead of focusing just on the historical record, we made it more of a process that we deconstructed. So as students started to get into this question, they began to think about campaigns, messages. How do you know if the message from the campaign is correct? They learned that the Nazis didn't always use anti-Semitism in their campaigns. Why not? Why would they target certain people with certain messages? Does that happen to us today? You know, what happens if a campaign would use hate speech? How would that work? Is hate speech something we should tolerate? And so you can see how by changing the question, we invited students into a process that is not way back here, but it's something that they can recognize. It's something that they can own. And so it became a vibrant discussion around hate speech, propaganda. What messages do I believe in? And so we didn't relativize the history. We didn't water it down, but we revealed how the process worked. And in so revealing, we made it clear that these processes continue to go on and on today, and that students are part of the process. And in fact, our exhibit that we created on propaganda is so relevant that our partners at UNESCO in Paris have asked us to send the exhibit there in January for International Holocaust Remembrance Day, and we're translating it into French. And I think as you think about the events over the past week and even over the past months, year in France, they see a need for a discussion around some of these same questions that we like our students to think about and talk about as well. All right. So while the results of our evaluation are somewhat depressing, and while they offer some sobering statistics about what students are capable of learning, I do think, and I hope you also see and heard through my remarks, that it is an opportunity for us to really come together, and perhaps in new ways, not always in the old ways, the old siloed ways, but ways that allow us to really reach students, longer exposure, multiple sources, and I think this new Holocaust and Genocide Center here at Rowan University is going to be foundational in doing that in the coming decades. So I want to thank you very much, and it was a pleasure, and congratulations.
I'm just going to take a moment because I want you all to meet the new executive assistant executive director of the Holocaust Genocide Museum, Larry Glazer. Larry will be introducing our survivors. But I want to react for a moment to Dr. Newell's statement, and I want you to imagine that this row of people, of two survivors, is all the way across the stage, around the stage, with all the other genocides that have happened. And when you hear the responses, think about those also, because our Holocaust Genocide Resource Center talks about all of the atrocities that have happened. Today, we have our two wonderful survivors. At another workshop in the future, we will have students from the school and others from the area. So just imagine this road being filled up. Larry, please.
Good evening. I have the great pleasure to introduce my newest girlfriend. This is Helene Bolton, and this is Charles Middleburg.
I'm not your girlfriend.
No, you're not. That's why you got a separate introduction. I'm really happy that there are so many young people here, because this is a chance for you to hear what they went through, a little bit about their background, and to ask questions as well. I'm going to begin with Helene. Tell us a little bit about what your life was like before the Holocaust. What did your family do? Or what was it like where you lived? Anything that comes to mind.
Well, I come from a country called Czechoslovakia that's located I come from a country called Czechoslovakia that's located sort of Central Europe. And I come from a family of 7. I have 2 brothers, I had 2 sisters, my father and my mother. We lived in a modest home, and my father was a printer and bookbinding business. This is what he made a living for, and this is how supported our family. And we were, as I said, we come from a country that I come from, Czechoslovakia, at that time was totally democratic, just like here. We could choose our business, we could travel, we could do anything. It was a very democratic country, and we lived very peacefully with the neighbors that we had. We had half of the people were Jewish in our town, and half of them were Russians. We got along so perfectly there. There were never any incidents. We got along very well because we had a very democratic president called Masaryk, and he insisted on everybody getting along, and we did get along. And we lived very peacefully and nicely in the township. And for about 10,000 people. And we stayed there for until 1943. We had a very peaceful life there until we were occupied by the Germans. In 1943, the Germans marched in with such a vigor, with so much hatred for us, that we barely could understand what was going on because we were not used to brutality like that. The first German that walked into our town, our mayor tried to introduce himself to him, and as soon as he walked close by, he started to hitting him, beating him, until he was full of blood and on the floor. And after that, he said, "You just remember one thing, you never talk to a German. You never address one, and you never talk to one." And this was our introduction to Germany.
No. My turn?
Sure.
My story is quite different. I lived with my mom, my dad, and a younger brother in Paris, France. My dad was a watchmaker. He was the breadwinner. We were a middle-class family. My mom didn't work outside the home. She had enough to take care of 2 wild boys. We had a very large family in Paris. My mom had two brothers. They were married. I had little girl cousins. My father had a huge family throughout the whole city of Paris. The best I can remember from my early childhood, we were just a very happy family. We never missed of anything. I don't remember ever being hungry. My mom was a great cook. We went to school, my little brother and I. There was really nothing to talk about. If you needed to go visit, we didn't have television back in those days. We didn't even have the telephone at home. If we wanted to go visit with a member of the family or just a friend, you just hopped the bus or the metro and you just knocked on the door of the person you wanted to go visit and said, "Oh, hi, come on in, have something to eat, have something to drink." It was truly the best memories that I have of my early childhood is very peaceful and very little to talk about. It's everyday life. Actually, when I speak at schools, I start by telling that my story starts on September 1, 1939. This is the day that France declared war on Germany. And from that day, excuse the expression, all hell broke loose.
Charles, were there any signs, or could you see things going in an opposite direction, anything that you and your family were worried about?
Well, we already knew that it was going to be a war. My dad was already in the military. Most of my uncles, my male cousins, were in the military. They had been called in, or I would say perhaps, and I cannot remember exactly, but it would be at least 6 months before the invasion. There were noises about there was going to be a war, but you got to understand, those memories are very vague to me because I was, on September 1, 1939, I was only 9 years old. To say that I was interested in the events of the country at that time would be foolish on my part to try to say something. But what did happen is that with all the preparations and all the male families that I had that were in the military, apparently the French military was totally disorganized, because in a matter of a few months, the Germans invaded the country. And there was this Maréchal Pétain, who was a hero of World War I. He saw what was happening. He took it upon himself. He saw how inept the French government was. He just took it upon himself to say, okay, we surrender. You win, we just lost. And when that happened, in order to they gave Maréchal Pétain half of France. They divided France in two parts, the northern part, the southern part. And the northern part to be occupied by the German military, and the southern part that would be unoccupied under the direction of Maréchal Pétain. This was a farce, because Maréchal Pétain could not enact any kind of a law or make any kind of a rule unless, of course, he had the approval of that German general who had been nominated to run the country. And then he set himself up in one of the luxury hotels of Paris, together with his staff. And as soon as he found himself totally located and happy with whatever he wanted to accomplish at that particular moment, he started making new rules. And that's when we suddenly realized that those rules were primarily directed to the Jewish population. In the beginning, I am sure all the adults must have been wondering, why in the world is he making new rules, but it's only for the Jews? But then I'm sure that they soon found out that this is exactly what they did for every country that they occupied. And of course, Czechoslovakia, Austria, Hungary, all the other countries that the German military had occupied, the first thing they did is set up rules primarily to the Jewish population.
Do you have any memory of an incident that we could talk about, or something that would give us a feel for how you and your family were impacted?
Well, the very first thing that did happen, that we felt the tremendous impact, is that my father got a summons in the mail, and the summons said, you present yourself on such and such day, such and such time in front of City Hall, bring a change of clothes, you will be working for the German military. If you don't show up on the date and time described in this summons, and we have to go get you, the punishment will be very severe. But that's, now that after all these other rules that had come out, this is the first time we heard about punishment. So my dad didn't want to take any chances, packed up a little suitcase with a change of clothes, just like he was told to do, and presented himself in front of City Hall. When he got there, 9,000 Jewish men had been summoned, same day, same time in front of City Hall. They took those 9,000 men, they put them in buses, and they bussed them about 120 miles south of the city of Paris into a camp. Now, remember, my mom never worked outside the home. She was just the homemaker. Things start getting a little difficult. Took away the breadwinner of the home. And that's when I must say that the rest of the families start bonding even tighter with each other. All the women that now didn't have a man at home start gathering together and gather their resources.
As this experience spun out, what did the family do to keep you and the other children away from this horror and keep you focused?
I failed to tell you that when I said this general started setting up new rules directed primarily to the Jewish population, there were a number of rules. One rule was, Jews are not allowed to be in business. If you're in business, give it away, sell it, you have a certain amount of time to do it. You're not going to do it, it's going to be confiscated anyway. Okay. Then the next rule, Jews are not allowed to travel. You live in the city, that's where you stay. Don't bother asking for permission to travel. And then the next rule came up, and Jewish children are no longer allowed to go to school. Private school, public schools, Jewish children cannot go to school. And then came the next rule that all Jews, men, women, and children, if they go into a public place, if you're outside in the street, in a public place, you must wear on your outside garment this yellow six-pointed star, and everybody knows what I'm talking about when I mentioned a yellow star, and then kind of redundant in the middle of the star was the word Juif, Jew. That kind of united the Jewish population of the city of Paris. Now, I don't mean that we would gather in groups, but we were pretty much all under the same fears, the same problems. Now we were wondering what was going to be next.
I ask Helene, did you have a similar situation in Czechoslovakia after a while where you knew all the rules were and how you had to live?
No, we lived peacefully there as long as the Germans didn't come in. Once they came in, everything changed. And I'm sure that all of you are familiar with Auschwitz. Otherwise, you wouldn't even be sitting here. But this was their idea. When they marched into our town, they gathered the people together in a ghetto and always gathered them together in one place where it's easy to transport for. And from that small ghetto, they took us to a major ghetto that was called Munkács Ghetto, where all of the Jewish people were gathered from that part of Czechoslovakia, which was called Carpathia. The Carpathian Jews were all gathered in Munkács Ghetto, and from there they wanted us to gather there because they had a railroad track there, which was easy to transport the people from that ghetto, and that's why we were living there for a few weeks until they decided to start transporting the people to Auschwitz. That was the most horrible thing that ever happened through the genocide. Auschwitz was the beginning of the horrible things that any time you entered Auschwitz, that means that your life was not anymore the same. First of all, we were a family of 7. And as we entered Auschwitz, and this is so abbreviated that I'm telling you that because I was instructed to just talk a few minutes, and I always obey my instruction. But when we entered Auschwitz, that was the most horrible thing that ever happened to the Jewish people, because out of the 7 of my family, right away, everybody was sent into the gas chambers. That's how Auschwitz was built. It was built with gas chambers and right next to it, crematoriums. So they easily got rid of the Jewish people, which was their idea. No matter what they did, put you to all kinds of camps. Their idea was to get rid of exterminate you. The only reason they left us out, a few of us, because they needed the labor so badly, so they didn't exterminate everybody. From my family, I'm the only one that was left. But most of the families were like that, because they didn't take women with children, they didn't take old people, they didn't take sick people, they didn't even take people that were major crippled. They had a whole Europe to select people from. So they took only those that were the healthiest. And we went through inspections daily. But the last inspection of mine was going from in Auschwitz, and there a doctor called Mengele, who selected the final people who were shipped to work in the factories. They needed the labor so badly because they were so thin. They were stretched out all over Europe, all those countries, France, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Belgium, Holland, all they were occupied, and they needed people for occupations, and the workforce was mostly done from the people that they brought in from Europe.
Lane, with all that going on, how did you make it to liberation? What was liberation like?
Well, we were liberated actually in Bergen-Belsen. If I would tell you what Bergen-Belsen meant, you couldn't even imagine or believe that there is such a place. We walked in, my last trip was I actually worked for Kruppwerke in Essen. They were the biggest manufacturers of the world of ammunition, and they supplied all the ammunition for all the Germans, and they needed a lot of it. So I worked there, and after the war started to shrink, we were transported to a camp called Bergen-Belsen. And on the way getting to Bergen-Belsen, most people were already so weak and tired that they already collapsed, and as soon as you collapse, they right away shoot you. There was nothing hard about them to just shoot you on the spot. If they didn't like the way you walked or they didn't like anything, they just shot you. There was no big deal to them to shoot you on the spot. Guys, we got to Bergen-Belsen. It was the most horrible place that God ever saw or created. I can't even believe that God really created a place like that. We walked in there, and the smell of death was right there. The dead people were gathered together in pyramids because they didn't have crematoriums in Bergen-Belsen. I don't know whether they didn't have any or they weren't functioning, but the people were put together like in pyramids, high as they could put them. Dead people, all there, for one group, another group. And when we came in and watched those dead people there gathered in those pyramids, and the rest of them who gathered the dead together were half dead. They could barely 3 or 4 people pull one of them to put them up on those pyramids. And they had plenty of them there in Bergen-Belsen. And people were dying every day because there was a sickness there. It was called typhus. I don't think that it anymore exists. I think it was eradicated. I hope it was. But most everybody had some kind of a beginning of typhus. Most everybody was sick in Bergen-Belsen. There was actually never any food given out. I was there for 2 weeks before we were liberated, actually, by the British. The British marched into Bergen-Belsen and liberated, if you call it liberation, because most of the people were already half dead. I was very sick. I remember that we couldn't even move anymore. First of all, we never got any food. And the water was contaminated with typhus, that if you drank it, you knew you are going to die. You're either going to die of thirst or you're going to die of typhus, because those are the only 2 choices you had in Bergen-Belsen. Bergen-Belsen was something that cannot be described or cannot be even... When I remember it, I cannot sleep the next day, because this was the most horrible place that you could ever imagine. People, we knew that in Auschwitz they killed the people. We knew that they had crematoriums, they burned them. We knew all that, but we never saw it. We saw all of it in Bergen-Belsen. All of those people that were half dead or those dead was right there in front of our eyes, and we knew right away what is waiting for us too. It was only one thing that could be waiting there. If the British wouldn't have come in at that time, I wouldn't have been around anymore. But most of the people in Bergen-Belsen wouldn't have been around anymore because of that horrible typhus that was the rampage through the camp.
Charles, tell us about how things evolved in France to the end. How were you liberated?
After I just heard, and of course I've heard Helene's story many times. Mine does not compare. Mine does not compare only because I never was in a concentration camp. After they took my dad, we were very fortunate, because if anybody has ever been to Paris, you will know that people live in big apartment buildings. And those apartment buildings always have a janitor. We happen to live on the 5th floor of one of those tall buildings, and the janitor was a veteran of World War I. He hated the Germans with a passion. He had lost a leg during that war, and he was wearing like a peg leg. This man, I owe him my life. When the Germans came for my mother, my brother, and me, he showed us where to hide. He showed us how to hide. May I tell how? He took us to the top floor. It was a 7-story building. When we got to the top floor, we lived on the 5th floor. He took us up to the other 2 floors, and then he opened up the small door, and in that little room that was there was all kinds of tools, and it looked like the tools for the maintenance people to keep the building in good order. Then he showed us this trap door. If you open it up, and you can pull down this rope ladder, this is the way you have access under the roof. He said, what I have in mind is that if they come for you, and when they come for you, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to try to manage to come up with them. And I'm going to take the rubber tip off the bottom of my peg leg, and as we come up the steps, since they were wooden steps, there was no elevator, I will be banging the wooden peg leg on the steps. When you hear that noise, get out of your apartment, come up here, open up that trap door, get the rope ladder, climb in there, pull the rope ladder back, close the trap door, they'll never find you. When lo and behold, the night of July 16, 1942, they came for us. We ran out of the apartment, up the 2 flights of steps, did exactly what the janitor told us to do, and we hid ourselves under the roof. We stayed there until about noontime. Around noontime, my mom, now understand, this is now 1942. I'm 12 years old. My brother is 8. My mom whispers to me, can't stay here forever. I'll tell you what, I'm going to give you some money. You go down and go get a baguette. I said, are you kidding? You're for real? You're going to give me money and you want me to go by myself? Go get a bread now? She said, well, we can't stay here forever. We've got to find out what the heck is going on. She says, and I don't think that they're going to bother a little boy 12 years old, all by himself, a skinny little boy. I was a very skinny little kid. So my mom insisted, and I wasn't going to have an argument with my mother. I took the money. I came down the 2 flights of steps. When I got to the 5th floor where our apartment is, the German soldier is standing. The door to the apartment is wide open. There's a German soldier there. I just ran quick past him, all the way down to the street level. When I got to the street level, it was incredible mayhem. They were pulling people out of the buildings, men, women, children, pushing them into trucks and carting them away. I went over to the bakery. The woman at the bakery, she knew me because I always came to buy the bread. She was really surprised. Never asked me for the coupons. You needed coupons to buy food. Never asked me for money. She just automatically picked up one of the baguettes, handed it to me. I ran out of the store, back into our apartment, right up again. And this time, when I passed the German soldier on the floor, I went, I got a baguette, and very quickly passed from him as I just went for an errand, and then joined my mom and my brother. We ate the bread, and we lay there some more. We laid there until dark. Then my mom says, let's do it again. Well, this time I'm a heck of a lot braver. Nobody, even the German soldier didn't stop me. When we came down to the 5th floor, the door to the apartment is wide open, but there's no German soldier. I went all the way down to the street level and totally deserted, not a soul. Now came a time you cannot stay in the apartment. They missed us the first time. They have our name, and they know exactly where we live. They're going to come back. So for the next couple days, We just slept in doorways and we ate the best way we could. And then my mom tells my little brother and me, she says, I know this lady, a Gentile lady. She has a way of taking Jewish children out of the city of Paris, and she has a way to place them out in the countryside. I want you two to go with her. Well, of course, my brother and I first objected. There was no point objecting. My mom had made up her mind because she said, by myself, I'll be able to move around a lot better than with both of you. We met this lady, we kissed my mom goodbye, and then we took the train. We wind up in a small village in the southwest part of France. These people it was a small goat farm. That the next day after we went to sleep, the lady that took us in the train, she's gone. We stayed there. Now understand, it was September. It was not difficult for my little brother and me to become friendly with the other kids in the village. We became friendly. This went on for a few weeks, and then this lady came back. As she came back, she hands me a letter, and she says, I want you to read this letter, and I want you to tell me what you want to do. That was a surprise. I opened the letter, and inside the letter, the envelope, there's a ring, and I recognized one of my mom's rings. When I open up the letter reads, I am sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but I witnessed your mom getting caught in a raid. However, she had time to jot down how I can get in touch with the lady that took you out to the countryside. If you're okay, I promised your mom that I will keep in touch, make sure that you're okay. However, if you want to come back to the city of Paris, I will arrange with the lady that took you out to the countryside to bring you back. Well, to make a long story short, I'm a 12-year-old kid, I got an 8-year-old little brother, I got a decision to make. And as far as I'm concerned, my mom, she's so smart because she managed to find a way to buy food, to pay for the rent while my dad had been taken away. So she's that smart that she's going to find a way to escape. And if she escapes, then she doesn't even know the name of the village where we are. It's best for me and my brother to be back in the city. And I told that the lady, and that's exactly what she did. We packed up our little suitcase and back to the city. When we're back in the city, we meet with this lady who wrote the letter. It turned out that she's married, she has a husband, 2 children, a little girl 3 years older than me, a little boy 2 years younger than me, and she owns a cafe. After a couple days we were there, she takes me aside and she says, I know what I wrote in my letter, but I never believed that you were going to come back. I thought you were happy out in the countryside. Now, as you can see, I have a family, I'm running my business, okay? I know the principal of the elementary school. I'm not going to have a problem getting your brother in school, no questions asked. But you're ready to go to middle school. And you're going to have to get registered. They're going to ask all kinds of questions. She says, we cannot afford for anybody asking questions about you. You two have to be as invisible as possible. And let me tell you, this was a period where there was an enormous amount of collaborators, people that were just too happy to keep pointing out Jews that were hiding in the city to the German Gestapo.
Charles, we're going to help you answer a question here, right at the point that you just got to. One of our students has asked how long it took for you to feel a sense of safety at the end of it all, and how you got to that concept of safety after you've been through all this.
There never was a moment of safety. There never was a moment of real safety. I went working in that cafe. My little brother went to school, I went working in a cafe. And there would be German soldiers walking into that place, to the restaurant, and every time one of them would come in, I would fall apart and shaking and scared. The other part was that there were a lot of people that collaborated with the occupying Nazis, okay? So to be safe was never, during all these years that my little brother and I, we remained with that family that owned that restaurant. I must say that we counted every day that we managed to survive.
How did you wind up here in the United States?
On the boat. I'm sorry, I couldn't help it.
They want to know what they want to know.
No, I came to the United States because of all this. In August of 1945, that's, by then, I'm already 15 older. In August of 1945, my little brother and I got reunited with my dad. The day we kissed my mom goodbye and we were taken to the countryside was the last time I ever saw my mother. She did not make it. When we took stock of who survived all this horror, now we're talking about 1945 now, it turned out that of all the cousins and uncles and aunts and everybody else, my father, my brother, one of my father's cousins and me, 4 people, nobody else. When my father saw that, he said, I want to get out of here. I don't want to stay in France anymore. My father he and my mom were originally from Poland and had migrated to France quite a number of years before. He saw what happened throughout Europe, not just France, but throughout Europe. He went to the American embassy in Paris, and at that time there were millions of people who wanted to come to the United States, mostly people that were in DP camps, that managed to survive the concentration camps, like he did. And he applied at the American embassy, and we waited 5 years before finally we did get the letter that tells us, congratulations, Mr. Middleburg, you can come and pick up your visas.
And I ask the same question, if we can, to Helene. How did all
Well,
that go for you?
My stories, my life was totally different. When we were liberated in Bergen-Belsen, as I told you, by the British, after a couple of days, the Swedish Red Cross came in, and they selected the very sickest people. They selected about 500 to go to Sweden and recuperate. I was one of those that was lucky enough to be selected to be recuperated in Sweden. So there I was we were very sick. We had typhus and we were quarantined, and nobody could ever come close to that camp that we were located at. But after a while, after things settled down and things got better, and some of us survived, some of us didn't. But those that survived, that they were cured there, and we lived there in Sweden for 3 years. In Sweden, they were very nice. They were the most generous people in the whole world. They tried to help us out emotionally and physically. They had psychologists, they had hospitals, they had nurses, they had everything available. It took us about 2 years to recuperate and become a little bit human, because I didn't tell you when we got into Auschwitz, the first thing they did is cut off our hair. And the way we were emaciated without hair, we looked horrible. Coming into Sweden, we looked like people from a different planet that they never saw. The beautiful Swedish people never saw things like that. They didn't realize that things like that existed. So it took us 2 years to grow back a little here, to get a little weight on, to start remembering where we were or what happening. But all along we knew that we were left all alone in this world. Most of the people were left all alone in this world. So for a while we were living in Sweden, the Red Cross had a ledger, and it was circulated in the United States. So one of my mother's friends recognized my name, and they sent me an affidavit that means a contract that I'll never be a burden to the United States, because the United States at that time wasn't as generous as Sweden and took us in without any kind of references. They wanted to know if we make an application to go to the United States, that we are never going to be a burden to the government. So after she sent out that affidavit, and they got it at in Sweden, in Stockholm, and after I think 2 years or so, I got a visa to come to the United States, and she sent me the passage. The amount of passage, and I came on a Swedish ship called Gripsholm. We got here in New York Harbor, and she picked me up, and she was a very modest lady. She had a 3-room apartment in the Bronx, and she took me in like a daughter, and she really was very nice, and I lived with her for a while, and the first thing she did is registered me to school. In the Bronx, it was a Monroe High School in the Bronx. And some of the people that I spoke to in the high schools, they went to look for the records. They wanted to know exactly what happened and where I was. But the Monroe High School does not exist anymore. It was school in 1950. So now they don't even have any records, and the people that tried to find out everything, they couldn't get any information. So this is it. I came to the United States in my mother's friend's house, and I went to school. And in school, I met a Frenchman. He was also one that was in concentration camp for 4 years. The minute the Germans marched into Paris, they caught him, and they transported him right away to Germany.
So let me ask you, at that point, did you then feel safe?
Did I feel safe in Sweden?
No. Did you feel safe when you were here in the United States and you had a boyfriend?
Oh, yes, I felt safe. I wasn't worried about myself at all. I was never worried about myself. So I felt safe. Nothing worse could ever happen to me as it happened. So I didn't worry.
Folks, let's give him a hand. Thanks, folks.
Thank you. Wired here.
It's okay. We're going to take it off. Thank you so very much. We really had to cut it short, but our story has a lot more detail, okay? So hopefully we get invited again.
Thank you all very much for coming out this evening. Before closing, I'd just like to say a few words of thanks. The State Commission on Holocaust Education, Paul Winkler and Larry Glazer, have made this evening possible. And Helen Kirschbaum and our friends at the Goodman Holocaust Museum in Cherry Hill have been hugely supportive. Special thanks to everyone here at Rowan who's facilitated the event, and most especially, thank you to our speakers who have been nothing short of extraordinary. We'll be working to bring you further outstanding programs, and I'd especially ask you to look out for a teacher training workshop to be hosted this spring. Anyone who wishes to be kept apprised of events and activities kindly ask to fill out, if you look on your program on the back, there's a green card. You can give us your name and address, and email, and we will keep in close touch with you. We have a reception just outside in the foyer. I hope the conversations that we've started this evening will continue out there. Thank you all very much again for coming out. Shalom, peace, and good night.